I saw this video on open world games and was very interested in sort of giving my thoughts on open world games versus like linear games, things like that. I'm curious to know what this guy has to say.
Existed, not a lot has changed, or at least not as much as we would have hoped for. Don't get me wrong, a lot has changed. We went from here to here, which is a night and day difference. But as we dig a little deeper, I think a lot more has stayed the same than actually changed. Despite there being more of these games to play than
Yeah, I feel like there's like a fundamental design that was created probably early on in the day. I mean, open world games have always existed to a degree. You could argue that like the original Legend of Zelda was like an open world game. But like Red Dead Redemption 2 and Legend of Zelda are obviously very different, but they still have like a lot of the same paradigms.
ever before, most of them just end up feeling like the same game, or at least a variation of another one. And
Yeah.
it's been this way for a long time, but recently, things have started to change. I just finished playing Dragon's Dogma 2, and that game was really good. And
I still need to play this. I might like stream it. I haven't started streaming yet, but I'm thinking about maybe doing this. I heard it was like pretty good. Maybe not as like there wasn't as much like soul as the first one, but the game itself was like really good.
really weird for a lot of different reasons. But the thing that stuck out the most, and honestly the only thing holding it all together, is that exploring this game's world is amazing. After I finished it, I realized that the only other games that have ever made me feel that way was Breath of the Wild and Elden Ring. But why is
Breath of the Wild and Elden Ring are the two greatest iterations of open world gaming. And I think both of them owe a lot to something like, Skyrim or Oblivion or Morrowind, but like Elden Ring has taken the curated, like it's an open world, but it's so highly curated at the same time. There's unique items everywhere. There's unique dungeons everywhere, unique enemies everywhere. Yeah, there's some reuse of like, bosses, some enemies, things like that. But for the sheer amount of curation there is in the experience of it, it stands on its own. Plus with like the gameplay as well, right? Like you have such engaging gameplay part of it. And then like kind of in its own pillar is Breath of the Wild, which took like the sandbox idea of an open world and like took that to the nth degree. I remember Miyamoto or one of the designers, Aonuma maybe, was saying that they created like their own chemistry engine in Breath of the Wild for like interactions with like fire and like water and things like that. Those two, I've said this before in some of my videos, but Elden Ring and Breath of the Wild are the two pillar hallmark games of open world game design, and both of them can be studied. If you're a developer, I would study those two games if I'm ever making an open world game and understand what they did right and what they did wrong, and like iterate on that pretty much.
that? I always knew these games were really unique and different from other open world games, but for a long time I couldn't articulate specifically why these games were so different. But after doing some research, I think I finally found the vocabulary. Through a few key design decisions and philosophies, these three games create a spirit of curiosity, adventure, and discovery that I haven't experienced in any other game, at least in the AAA space. And I would like to call these games modern open world games. And I really want to talk about it. So let's first start with how we got here. In my eyes, I see three different developers/publishers who have set the tone for the entire genre.
I'm gonna predict one of them is definitely Ubisoft. The others maybe, I don't know if Nintendo did, because they weren't like big on open worlds, I don't think, but you could argue that some of the design decisions were there. But Ubisoft is definitely one of them for sure. I'm curious to know what the other ones are going to be. Maybe Rockstar, GTA, Red Dead Redemption, Rockstar, Ubisoft, and I'll think about what the third one is.
And the first one, of course, is Rockstar. In
Yeah,
2001,
yeah,
Rockstar
yep.
released GTA 3, and this was the start of it all. For the first time in video game history, you were able to explore a 3D open world full of NPCs to interact with, cars to drive, and a cinematic story to push you through the whole thing. This game single-handedly created the blueprint that most games still follow today when they make an open world. The whole idea of being able to look at a map full of different things for you to interact with and a lot of room to play around in between was pioneered right here. Granted, I'm being a little generous.
Yeah, the whole like idea of a sandbox was really popularized by GTA. Um, there's another game that I hope gets mentioned, Shenmue. I've never actually played it, but I've heard a lot about how this game kind of iterated and revolutionized in a lot of ways the like interactions that take place like in an open world. GTA though, a lot of people think it was just like shooting and killing hookers and stealing cars, but I mean the sandbox aspect of it, like the fact that you can get, it's like its own sort of immersion, right? Like you don't need immersion through cutscenes and dialogue, but just like by playing a role inside of this like really livable, lived in world.
This game actually didn't even have the ability for you to open a map, and if you wanted to look in the map, you had to open the actual game case and pull out a physical paper map to see what you were doing.
Games
and
used
the
to come
game's
with
main
those.
protagonist actually wasn't even voiced. So when I say a cinematic story, I'm more talking about cinematic building blocks rather than an actual written story. But then a year later, we got GTA Vice City, which added both a voiced protagonist and the ability for you to open a map, along with a lot of other very innovative things for the genre at the time. And then 2 years later, we got GTA San Andreas, which took the formula a step further, and it was probably the best game in the series up to that point. These games were so successful that it spawned so many other games trying to do the same thing, with varying degrees of success. A primetime example of this is Jak 2. Jak 1 was a 3D platformer very similar to most other 3D platformers at the time. These were linear levels designed around jumping between platforms, collecting coins, and kicking Goombas or whatever the fuck they were called at the time. But then 2 years later, we got Jak 2, which gives you a map to explore, cars to steal, a wanted system.
Yeah, a lot of games did the like half open, half not open world. I guess it's, you can call it like instanced design. I know like Knights of the Republic had that where it's like different zones and then like you would be able to explore freely in those zones. A lot of older games of that. Witcher 2 did that. Witcher 2 allowed you to explore. It was like semi-open world. I could be wrong on this, but I believe Banjo-Tooie was also kind of similar in the sense that like it wasn't these like really linear linear like levels, but sort of like larger areas that you could explore and like kind of like go through, and it seems like Jak 2 is like one of those as well.
And a cinematic story to push.
I don't know if it was like limitations on technology at the time. They like wanted to make an open world but couldn't, so they were like stuck doing these kind of like instanced half open world things, but or maybe if it was like a design thing.
Through the whole thing. This is one of the more successful adaptations of the GTA blueprint, and actually the first game I ever owned, making it my first experience with an open world game. And there's plenty of other games we could bring up as examples here, but I think you get the idea. Every Grand Theft Auto since GTA 3 continues to set the bar for what open world games can be, along with Rockstar's other franchise, Red Dead Redemption, which in a gross oversimplification is just GTA in the Wild West. For this reason, you can put both franchises on the same timeline of the ever-evolving Rockstar open world blueprint, and Red Dead Redemption 2 is the latest release in this evolution, which to this day stands as one of the greatest open worlds ever made. But despite
my hot take is that I found Red Dead Redemption 2 extremely boring. Something about it, like, I'm someone that really values gameplay, and I'm not saying that the gameplay in Red Dead Redemption 2 is bad by any means, but like I hate overly long tutorials that aren't like involved. Like if you're gonna have a long tutorial, I want it to feel like I'm like playing the game and like going through it and sort of experiencing the tutorial through gameplay. And Red Dead Redemption 2, like when you're in like the snow, I think I've replayed that snow mountain area probably like 4 times. Like I've tried to like start it and then got through it and like just got bored, got bored. Like it takes so long to like start up. Like I want to just start it and be in this world, right? I keep hearing about this world, and it's like 5 hours into playing, I'm not even in this world yet. And it's I don't know if I want to sit here and stomach this entire like forever game just to experience an open world when there's like so many other games I could be playing that allow me to just play the game. And I'm sure the game's amazing. It's just not for me, I don't think.
All the ways that this game pushed boundaries in terms of immersion, fidelity, scale. It's also the game that began to show the age in Rockstar's open world blueprint. Red Dead 2 at its core,
Okay.
like all the other games
This is
going
gonna be a good take,
on
I
the
feel
same
like.
blueprint that was designed in 2001. And that same blueprint that made all these other games successful is now beginning to hold back all the amazing innovations that these games are trying to make. I'm not going to get into all the details
Yeah.
on why that is, but if you want to know more, you should
Yeah, Nakey Jakey's whatever, his video was really, really good on this. I think this guy is probably, I mean, just judging by the style of like video, I think he obviously is a fan and consumes his content. But I do think I think a lot of these like legacy game developers, Rockstar, Bethesda, Ubisoft to a degree, like they've taken less risks over the years. Like there hasn't been this like big moment and this big design shift where they're like, okay, you know, I'm going to you know, like reinvent sort of like what has gotten us to this point. I think they've a lot of them have stagnated a bit. They still make great games because that formula is still so good, but they have stagnated a bit.
go watch Nakey Jakey's legendary video on the topic. And now on the horizon, we have GTA 6, which is probably going to be the biggest game release in history. But if I'm a betting man,
Probably, yeah.
it's probably going to use the same blueprint that all these other games used before it. But I hope I'm wrong. Now, the next developer slash
They're not
publisher that I wanna
reinventing the
talk
wheel with
about,
that one.
but like don't really want to talk about them, but you kind of have to in this context.
Ubisoft.
Is Ubisoft,
Yep.
and more specifically, Assassin's Creed and Far Cry. Assassin's Creed 2, along with GTA 3, is one of the
Very
most influential
unfortunate.
open world games ever made. It's
Yeah,
worth
I
noting
hear
that
like Assassin's Creed 2 and Brotherhood are like the two best Assassin's Creed games. I've never played an Assassin's Creed game. I know a lot about it just through like, you know, consuming like content, things like that. Just super not my style of game. Like Ubisoft games are just not. I don't play Far Cry. I don't play Assassin's Creed. Like I just cannot do it. It's these like checklists, these like little, it's a little marker. Hey, go to that little marker. You get 6 bears, and then there's like 50 of them in the entire. I'm not doing a checklist open world game.
Creed 1 did plant a lot of the seeds for the ideas and mechanics used in Assassin's Creed 2. But the execution of those ideas in Assassin's Creed 2 is what made the impact on the genre, so that's why we're focusing here. AC2 came 8 years after GTA 3, which at this point has created an established formula used by many other games, including Assassin's Creed 2. But Assassin's Creed took that formula and shifted it in a few key ways. Movement through the world is done by parkouring, which for a lot of people is way more engaging than doing this. The fidelity of the map was next level. It recreated all of these historical sites.
Assassin's Creed really added like verticality to open worlds and just game design in general. I think like a lot of the, like if you look at some like Uncharted or Tomb Raider, things like that, like they have a lot of this like jumping and grabbing and all of that, like a lot of games do, honestly. And I you can't talk about that design pillar that a lot of developers use without acknowledging like Assassin's Creed influence on those
Sites and monuments to such a high degree that even videos were going viral online of teachers using it as a visual aid for their history lessons. And then there was the narrative, which was leaps and bounds better than anything that GTA was doing at the time. And it gave us one of the most iconic video game protagonists of all time,
Ezio
Auditore.
Yeah,
These weren't the
Ezio.
only differences in the game, but these are definitely some of the biggest. All of these changes resulted in a really big tonal shift for what Assassin's Creed was given the genre versus what GTA was given the genre, which is why they were able to escape the identity of being just another GTA clone. GTA provided a really arcadey tone, which encouraged players not to really take it too seriously and to really mess around and have a good time with the mechanics. Assassin's Creed, on the other hand, took itself much more seriously, and this tonal shift does a lot of benefits for the narrative and the world and the immersion, but doesn't necessarily encourage the same playfulness that something like GTA does.
Yeah, it doesn't. It's kind of like a implied open world in the sense that like there's a lot of things that you think you can do that you can't do because there's a lot of like guardrails built into the game itself.
The success of this game,
And that's why Breath of the Wild is so genius, because it is truly like, I remember when Todd Howard said, you see that mountain over there, you can climb it, and it was like complete nonsense because there's like invisible walls and like unscalable cliffs and things like that. Breath of the Wild, it's, hey, you can climb that mountain.
single-handedly shifted Ubisoft's perspective as a developer, and they pretty much said, well, this works, how about we just do it again? And so this was the beginning and foundation of the Ubisoft open world blueprint. I think the cornerstone of this Ubisoft blueprint that most people will recognize today is the tower mechanic. In Assassin's
Yeah.
Creed 2, you had to climb these towers to get to a vantage point to reveal a section of your map. After revealing that section, it would show all the different little side activities and other things you can engage with in that portion of the map. This is a big departure from how, say, GTA would do things. They would just give you a full map from the beginning, and you get to see all the different things that you have available to you right from the start. But now in Assassin's Creed, this turned the process of revealing your map into an active thing you would do, and throughout
Yeah.
your playthrough, it would slowly get bigger and bigger.
This like map tower design thing, it's in like every open world game now. Even Breath of the Wild has it. What's it called? Horizon Zero Dawn has it.
And it was really satisfying for a lot of people to engage with. So the next year we get Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, and then the year after that we get Assassin's Creed Revelations, both following the blueprint set by Assassin's Creed 2. But then Ubisoft decides to take this blueprint outside of the Assassin's Creed series, into their next big release, Far Cry 3, which is where we truly see the formula cannibalized in the way that most other games have used it today. At its core, it's still the same
Yeah.
process of climbing a tower to reveal that section of the map and everything within it. Where in Assassin's Creed, you can still fundamentally function without having to reveal every section of your map. In Far Cry, they made it a true predecessor to being able to do almost anything in that area. Yes, you could just run to different points of interest just without revealing the map, but it makes it a lot harder. One of the key design decisions made in Far Cry 3 was the idea of over-telegraphing everything you can interact with in the environment. This comes in the form of everything you can see on your mini-map and the map itself. Many of the side activities in the game, such as hunting, were almost impossible to interact with without revealing that portion of the map, which at the time wasn't a big deal. But as the formula kept repeating itself across many other games, this gameplay loop of revealing your map to chase down a bunch of different icons on it led to a different problem that plagues the genre, and it's bloat. To oversimplify,
Yeah, I mean, this is like a natural issue that sort of propagates with open world games, is that you can create, like, we've gotten the technology to create a lot of game basically. Like Unreal Engine can generate entire landscapes, things like that, detail. But the thing is, you have to fill it with content. Like, we're not creating wallpapers, right? We want to create video games. So developers need to fill these giant landscapes that technology can very easily create these landscapes, but technology cannot very easily generate content. So the task becomes like multiplicatively hard for developers to create, because they need to fill it. Elden Ring has the same issue. Even though it's an amazing game, probably one of the best games of all time, they need to, you're refighting the same bosses in certain areas because they just don't have the content to justify having this open world. It's very difficult for a developer to determine what the proper scale is to keep sort of like that sense of scale and that grandiosity of like, this is a giant world I'm immersed in, versus how much content can we meaningfully fill into this open world. Like, every developer needs to make that choice, and the best games are the ones that do that balancing act very well, and the worst games are the ones, like, for example, Dragon Age Inquisition, I think, was a really bad example of just useless space. Like the Hinterlands, for example, a lot of people talk about the Hinterlands, just full of like complete garbage, like MMO does. They call it MMO, like, quest design, because it's like, in MMOs it makes sense because you're sort of like, it's a lot of like emergent gameplay by interacting with a lot of people. But in a single player game, that game inherently needs to be curated for a single player experience. So people will excuse it at MMOs of like, okay, 8 boar skins or 8 hawk livers or whatever, it's fine. But in a single player game, players have very, very low tolerance for meaningless bloaty content. And Ubisoft, as their like games have gotten more large, like more space, things like that, their content creation has not kept up at all in any meaningful way.
a little bit. Bloat is pretty much the idea of filling your open world with a bunch of repetitive tasks.
You get all these
solely to really
markers,
pad out the
all
amount
this
of
like
time it
junk,
takes you to play the
basically.
game.
Like,
Ubisoft
if you look at that map, like, it's just 80% of it is just junk.
The pinnacle of this issue in the genre, and they want to make sure when you reveal that portion of the map in whatever game it is that there is a dozen different icons for you to go chase down, solely to pad out the amount of time it takes you to play their game.
I think like in the beginning when you like first, it's like it's kind of like this like dopamine loop where you have this world, right? It's empty. You don't know what's on the map, right? So then the player sees in the distance this like tower. The player goes to that tower and reveals sort of like the map and all the markers. And when the player sees all these markers, like that moment of revelation creates a feedback loop in the player's mind where they're like, wow, there's a lot of content in this game. This is like, wow, look at all these things I can do. And I think at the beginning with a lot of these games, that fooled a lot of people. Like people weren't wizened up to the fact that a lot of this content was bloat. So they're like going through like, wow, like I can do this. I can like skin this animal. There's an animal camp here. There's like an enemy camp here with like some reward that gives me like, 4 crafting materials or something. But by the time that player gets bored of that area's content and they feel like they go to the next tower and they reveal, and like that loop and like the whole thing, so that loop like continues throughout. It's gotten very stale. I think people have wisened up to it a lot. People are very tired of it. There's obviously some people that find that like that gameplay loop to still be satisfying, but most people I think find it to be pretty boring and pretty tired out.
And I believe we'd have a very different relationship with all these bloated side activities if it wasn't so over telegraphed to us. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here, and we're going to come back to this idea later. Both Assassin's Creed and Far Cry have become Ubisoft's biggest franchises, and since these 2 games, there's been a lot of them. But despite there being so many, there's been very little innovation that's taken place across all of them. It is not an exaggeration to say that every Far Cry since Far Cry 3 fundamentally still plays like Far Cry 3. And the same can almost be said about Assassin's Creed. Since Assassin's Creed 2, so many games came after it fundamentally playing the same way. Granted, a few of them had some novel and new ideas, but at its core, they all played the exact same way. Until we got Assassin's Creed Origins. Now, Assassin's Creed Origins, to their credit, is a fundamental rethinking of the series from the ground up, and it changed many aspects of the game, which is good. But since then, they fell into the exact same formula of just making the same game over and over again. With every new Assassin's Creed or Far Cry, or by proxy almost every other Ubisoft franchise, it's clear that the focus is on taking what works and making it bigger rather than trying something new. And there's a lot of different reasons on why this keeps happening, most of them relating to money, but for our purposes, all we really gotta know is that they've been operating in the same blueprint for a very long time, and it has had a very profound effect on the wider landscape of open world games. Now, the final developer / publisher that
I'm gonna say that this last one's probably Bethesda. That is my guess. Let's see if we can go 3 for 3 because I'm thinking about it, right? Like Starfield, like Skyrim. Like you can't talk about open world games without talking about Skyrim. So it's gotta be Bethesda.
I want to bring up that is shaping the genre along.
Oh yeah, that's the that's the Skyrim music. Yeah. Okay, so we're 3 for 3. Man, see this guy, me and him, we're clicking.
With these other 2 developers that I mentioned is Bethesda. Now, this whole time that Rockstar and Ubisoft have been putting out all these games, so has Bethesda, but Bethesda's been doing it kind of in their own lane. Now, the 2 main franchises out of Bethesda
Fallout
is The Elder Scrolls and
Elder Scrolls,
Fallout.
yeah.
It's important to bring this up now because fundamentally, both of these franchises play in the exact same way, except they're just in 2 different settings. One of them is in a fantasy setting, and the other is in the post-apocalypse. The blueprint started off in The Elder Scrolls Morrowind, which established many of the franchise's key features like character creation, exploration, and questing. And then we got The Elder Scrolls Oblivion, which took all the groundwork laid in Morrowind and made it more accessible and polished for a wider appeal. Then Bethesda acquires the rights to Fallout, which at this point has already had 2 other games in the series. So then they took everything that they've learned from the Elder Scrolls series so far and applied it to the post-apocalyptic setting for Fallout 3. These games were all really successful, and it put Bethesda on the map as one of the biggest game developers in the industry. And
I played Skyrim for a bit. I played it on an Xbox 360 and the load times were horrendous just going in and out of houses, so I just stopped playing it. I never played it after that. So I actually never played Skyrim or Fallout. From what I can tell, there's like an immersive sim aspect to this, to like the Skyrim games or like the Elder Scrolls games that is like gives it an edge from other sort of open world games. There isn't this like, it's not like over designed in an annoying way. But it's not quite under designed either. It's like, it's hard to describe these types of games because a lot of it depends on how the player interacts with it. But these games, I will say, like, he's going to talk about it more, so I don't want to, you know, repeat what he's saying, but I will say that these games are kept alive. Like, Bethesda games are kept alive through modding. Like, if you couldn't mod their games, these games would die very quickly, I think.
And then we got Skyrim. Skyrim to this day is still one of the biggest and most popular open world RPGs ever made. On one hand, this is due to the insane modding community around this game that has breathed so much life into it and is still supported to this day. And the other being that this is the culmination of all the experience that the Bethesda team had learned up to this point, coming together to make the ultimate game that they had always wanted to make. At this point, Bethesda was on a roll, making hit after hit, but after Skyrim, things started to get a little...
I feel like Skyrim, this is kind of a weird take, but I feel like Skyrim gives off the same vibe and energy to people as Minecraft does. It's like chill. You can like do stuff, right? Like there's like a satisfying gameplay loop. The music's very, like, there's a lot of ambiance with the music. It's very, very relaxing, but like there's like periods of action. You feel like you're like building up this like story, this character, this like journey. Through Minecraft, it's like, you know, you're building up like your house, like your whatever, you're going out to make like expeditions to get diamond or whatever whatever Minecraft people do. But they give me like the same vibe.
Rocky. The next main release out of Bethesda was Fallout 4, and this game fundamentally did still play the same way as all the previous games before it, but received a much more mixed reception, and some people loved it, some people hated it. Next, we got Fallout 76, which was their attempt at taking the formula to a
One of the worst
multiplayer
games of
setting,
all time,
and it
apparently.
bombed at launch, but has persevered and found a dedicated community within it. And then Starfield came out. Starfield was Bethesda's first new original IP.
Starfield is like the biggest exposing of a developer I've seen in a long time. Like, I've never seen people's opinion on a developer like go completely 180 more than like Bethesda and Starfield. I think Starfield was like genuinely awful. Like, Starfield was so mid, the most mid like experience of my life in terms of gaming. Like, just actually Outer Worlds I think was the most mid game I've ever played. But Starfield was like, wow, it was like the most uninspired, just like I couldn't even play it. Like I couldn't get through it. I just, so uninspired, so mid, just nothing satisfying about it. You know, I've watched videos on like what's bad about it, and I agree with everything. I've heard like the shipbuilding is cool, and I'm like a fan. I might play it just for the shipbuilding aspect. I don't know. I am a fan of like creating like your own cozy space.
Since the Elder Scrolls, and the elevator pitch for the game was supposed to be Skyrim in space.
Which
it kind of was, but it's not 2011 anymore. And the farther players got into the game, the more their opinions about it began to sour. And it's because the deeper you go, the more you realize how outdated Bethesda's blueprint is. And now on the horizon, we have The Elder Scrolls 6, also one of the most anticipated games of all time, up there with GTA 6. And I hate to say it, but again, if I'm a betting man, it's probably going to function very similarly to how these other games did.
My theory is that Elder Scrolls 6 was announced, obviously, to like sort of tide people over because, you know, Elder Scrolls fans were starving after Skyrim. And I think it was in development. But after the reception of Fallout 76 and Starfield, I think they've maybe gone back to the cutting board and back to the drawing board and are rethinking how they can innovate on sort of like the Bethesda formula for Elder Scrolls 6, because I don't think they can handle having Elder Scrolls 6 be bad. Like, I think that would spell that would bring up like some doomer opinions on sort of where Bethesda's at in the industry, because that's like, it's such a easy, like, if it's good, it'll probably one of the highest selling games of all time if it's good. But if it's bad, I don't know how Bethesda recovers from that. So I think they've been working on it, and they've been rethinking sort of some of the design paradigms for Elder Scrolls 6 because of like Starfield and Fallout 76. I think Fallout 76 it was bad, but like they're like whatever, like we'll have Starfield, which is like, you know, that like gold standard Fallout Elder Scrolls type, you know, open world game. And then it just like wasn't good. And I think now they're a little worried.
But hey, I hope I'm wrong. So now we get to look at this timeline in its entirety, and it represents a vast majority of the biggest and best open world games the genre has to offer. So what can we pull away from it? Well, the biggest point that I've been hitting on here is that the vast majority of these games are built on blueprints that were made over 20 years ago. And we went through a very heavy period of innovation early on, and since then that innovation has stalled significantly. These blueprints have now hit a maturity point.
People have gotten, I think people have gotten very tired of open world games. Even with Elden Ring, I think there was a lot of complaints about how towards the end it just feels like too much. There's just too much going on, and the best parts about Elden Ring were honestly the legacy dungeons. Stormville Castle, amazing. The Halic Tree, amazing. Volcano Manor, amazing. Rylokar, like there's no one has any complaints about the legacy dungeons. The open world has a lot of issues. And with Breath of the Wild, I think people got tired of it. Like it's proven by Tears of the Kingdom. I'm a huge Zelda fanboy, but Tears of the Kingdom was just a step back in some way. It's a weird game. He'll probably talk about it. So I'll let him get to that. But like Tears of the Kingdom and some of the Elden Ring complaints make me think that open world games are just not necessarily the most enjoyable experiences in 2024.
And are long overdue for a fundamental rethinking of their core designs. A universal that I also see a lot of these games sharing is the idea of hand-holding. How you discover a lot of the content that these games have laid out for you to experience is by opening your map and seeing a bunch of waypoints for you to go chase down. And a lot of the time, you'll even get a path drawn for you showing you exactly how to reach that waypoint. This ends up kind of creating a passive experience that guides you through the world rather than an active experience of you exploring it. To be fair, Bethesda's games have strayed the farthest away from these hand-holding tropes and let you explore in any direction with very little restriction. But at the end of the day, these worlds are still built in a way where the quests you encounter are the things pushing you through it. And this ends up boiling down to you just chasing waypoints rather than you actively exploring it. Another byproduct of this waypoint-driven exploration system is the idea of fatigue in open world games, which for some games goes hand in hand with the idea of
very big.
For a lot of people, myself included, when you open a map,
like, yeah, I was gonna say, literally just looking at this map makes me tired. Like, just looking at it, I'm just like, I don't want to. Like, I have genuinely done this where I've looked at stuff like this, and I'm like, okay, so the next 50 hours of game. So I find this tower, I find that tower. Okay, there's some things there, there's some things there. Then I'm gonna get this, I'm gonna get that, which is gonna make me stronger. But then I'm not necessarily gonna need that because there's not that much challenging gameplay. Because it's a very handhold experience. So I guess I'll just see the landscapes. But are the landscapes really worth it? I could just go outside and see landscapes in real life. So is it really? And then I like take it to the nth degree, and then I just don't play them because I'm like, okay, I've thought through everything that's going to happen in this game, and it's just not worth it.
And you see dozens of icons everywhere, it can quickly start to feel like more of a laundry list. Instead of being excited to explore and discover, you end up feeling tired and intimidated by all the things you have to go do. There are some very popular open world games that don't fall into this timeline.
If you don't feel satisfied and entertained after playing a video game, then you need to stop playing video games. Video games are vehicles of entertainment. If you are not going pro in a video game, and like it's like your like professional job or something, and you're only playing it for entertainment, like that's it. Like there's no reason to ever feel, if you ever feel tired or annoyed by a video game, you should just stop playing it.
Like Ghost of Tsushima, Horizon, or the Witcher series. But these games and others all pull very heavily from what these three developers have done and are more known for refining these blueprints rather than making something new. I know not everyone's going to feel the same way about these takeaways that I've brought up here.
Yeah, like Witcher 3 is one of the greatest games of all time, but it's also just that formula honed to like a fine edge. It's not like innovative in any way.
One of these games might
not to say that like innovation is the most important thing, Like you can have something that's, you know, pretty blueprinty but still really good.
Someone's first experience with one of these blueprints, meaning that that person won't be carrying the same baggage as someone who's been playing in these blueprints for many years already. Or there's just people who have no issue with the type of experience these blueprints are providing. But as someone who's been playing these types of games for as long as I've been playing video games, going all the way back to Jak 2, I'm getting very tired of the current state of things. And I know for damn sure I'm not the only one. But as I said at the top, things are starting to change, and there's almost a new blueprint working its way onto the scene. And that started with Breath of the Wild. Despite Nintendo being one of the biggest developers in the world and making...
Dude, I love Nintendo, man. Really do. What such GOAT developers, man. Like they just do, they're so focused on what they do and they do it so well.
Games longer than most of these other developers we've been talking about. They've never taken a stab at an open world game, but in their arsenal of IP, Zelda was primed to take on the opportunity.
Oh yeah.
The Legend of Zelda as a game.
Well, they got some help from the people who made Xenogears, I believe, or like Xenoblade or whatever. They had Monolith Soft, I think is the company. They helped, they consulted a lot for the development of Breath of the Wild, so a lot of their influence is on that game.
Series has reinvented itself multiple times.
Shout out Monolith.
And in doing so, invented many core design principles used across many different games. But for Breath of the Wild, they wanted to go back to their roots and recapture the magic of the original Legend of Zelda. The game just drops you into a world with the goal of finding the 8 pieces of the Triforce with no map, no tutorial, no guidance. Now, they didn't end up taking it that far. In Breath of the Wild, they do give you a tutorial, a map, and very vague guidance, but the goal became to recapture the feeling of letting your curiosity become the driving force pushing you through the world. But in attempting to do this, they faced a challenge. Nintendo wanted to create a vast open world where you felt free to explore in any direction with no restrictions, but when you can do that, how do you push a story forward? This took a lot of testing to figure out, and what Nintendo landed on was the idea of placing points of interest way out into the distance that would provide a huge benefit to the player, so they would naturally be incentivized to head in those directions, and when you got there, it would lead to a story beat. This became the purpose of Sheikah Towers, which were these large towers you can see way out into the distance, and if you climb to the top of it, it will reveal a large portion of your map. But Nintendo...
What's cool about the way Breath of the Wild implemented the Ubisoft towers is that the towers, because like you could use the glider to like move around from like vantage points to other points of interest, the towers also fed into the gameplay loop itself. It didn't just reveal it like an area then be like, okay, cool, like you can go check that out now. It like allowed you to actually like reposition where you were exploring, so it actually fed back into the gameplay of the game in a really smart way. I think that was like a really genius way of designing like that whole like Ubisoft tower thing.
Nintendo wanted players to go explore, not just run straight towards these towers, and in their early playtests, that's exactly what players did, and the players that decided to veer off the path found nothing really of interest to make it worth it. So to remedy this, they ended up creating a bunch of smaller points of interest that would reveal themselves to you as you made your way to the Sheikah Tower, creating all these moments of discovery that would inevitably pull you off your main path to the objective. Each one of these places provided their own unique benefits, like say you wanted more health, you'd go here, or if you wanted better weapons, you could go here, or more inventory space, and you were never forced to engage with any of these. It's just if you wanted to. This created a breadcrumb trail that encouraged players to explore the map in a variety of different ways while still eventually leading them to the intended point of interest, a Sheikah Tower. But Nintendo was aware that if there was too many different things to do on screen at one time, it can become very overwhelming, very similar to that experience I was describing with all the different map markers feeling like a laundry list.
Lack of map markers in Breath of the Wild was so genius. Just so genius. I think Nintendo made a lot of underrated, maybe not underrated because people obviously are making videos about them and stuff, but like just genius decisions with the design of Breath of the Wild. Like the fact that like the game, like the towers, right? Like so like the shrines, right? Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. The shrines give you stamina, which allow you to traverse the world more elegantly and at a faster pace. So you would find these shrines, and then you're going towards the tower, and you would find the shrines on the way, like they said, And so then you would have better navigation to the shrines, get to the tower, be able to navigate better. And like everything was spread out enough for it to feel worth it. Like it felt like you were genuinely discovering something meaningful, but wasn't so spread out that it felt like you were going super far without finding anything worth looking at. Like there was always something, like with the way the verticality of the game was designed, was like you could be standing on like a cliff and always see something that was like kind of interesting.
And this is where we now get to see the really clever way that they decided to design their map, and they called it the triangle rule. To put it simply, they decided to design most of the terrain around the map with cones and triangles, and this provides a few key benefits. The first of which is a form of decision making. Do I go over the mountain or around the mountain? The next benefit is that our eyes are naturally drawn to the top of the triangle, so things placed at the top will catch our eye. And the third and most important benefit is that it hides other points of interest, meaning that there's only a handful of landmarks on screen instead of dozens at a time. There's a really good video by Game Maker's Toolkit that breaks down everything I've been talking about here in a lot more detail. So if you want to know more about Breath of the Wild and how it was designed, please go watch this video. Now, I realize that the idea of climbing a tower to reveal a portion of your map sounds awfully similar to the Ubisoft mechanic I was shitting on earlier, and I need to express that there is a key difference between how Nintendo does it and how Ubisoft does it. The difference is simple. When you climb a tower in Breath of the Wild and it reveals that portion of the map, everything within that portion of the map stays hidden. Even though you can now see that portion of the map, it's still on you to go explore and discover all of the secrets within it. And then once you find something, it then shows up on your map. This actually creates the inverse of that laundry list effect that I was talking about. So
it feels
now
like
when you open your map
accomplishment.
and you see a bunch of icons, it's not like, oh, look how much I have to go do. It's like, wow, look how much I've done.
I did, yeah,
Nintendo
exactly. Like it's a complete inversion of that gameplay loop.
ended up creating this gameplay loop that was driven by the player's curiosity of seeing something in the distance and them going on their own adventure to get there, truly recapturing the magic from the original Legend of Zelda. This game single-handedly changed how both developers and gamers viewed how an open world can be crafted from the ground up, and we wouldn't see another developer successfully pull this off again for another 5 years when we got Elden Ring. From Software, like Nintendo, is another developer who had never made an open world game, but instead spent the past 10 years pioneering their own genre that has had a profound effect on the gaming industry, known as Souls-like or Soulsborne, or I don't know which one's right. They did this by releasing Demon Souls, Dark Souls
Souls-like.
1, 2, and 3, Bloodborne, and Sekiro. Each one of these games are known for their high level of difficulty in combat that forced you to master its mechanics by beating your head against the same boss until you got good. Some love it, some hate it, and Elden
Well, really, it's about like the games took off because it was like Dark Souls popped off during a time where we had peak hand holding. Like you literally weren't allowed to lose. Like if you had one bad feeling, like that's it. Like it was just the game developer think they failed if you like felt bad at any moment or felt like you're like, it was like literally press X to win. And then like you come into Dark Souls, there's no map, there's no explanations, there's nothing, everything's really weird and ambiguous and archaic, and you just like walk up to the skeleton and you just get killed. Like that moment is just so, it was so perpendicular to how games were during that era of gaming that, I mean, it was going to take off at some point.
Ring was their attempt to bring this formula that they've made into an open world setting. The game's director, Hidetaka Miyazaki, credited Zelda as one of his inspirations, and the world of Elden Ring ended up being designed.
Yeah, oftentimes what happens is like great games influence other great developers, and those great developers make great games. Like, I love that like interplay between like amazing developers who like make amazing games
with a lot of the same principles, but they were shifted in a few key ways. Where Breath of the Wild lets you explore in any direction that you want to right from the start, Elden Ring funnels you through its map in a desired order, opening up and closing at certain points. This creates several smaller, isolated regions that can be explored in whichever way you like, but they will inevitably funnel you to a legacy dungeon that separates it from the next section. These legacy dungeons became the focal points at which players would experience the key moments in the game, similar to how Zelda used Sheikah Towers as focal points for the same reason. Even though you can't just walk straight to the other side of the map like in Breath of the Wild, Elden Ring still functions under the principle of letting the terrain guide the player's eyes to points of interest, and then the player's curiosity becomes the motivating factor on which way they want to explore. But Elden Ring takes this philosophy a step further than Zelda did. Zelda provided waypoints for their main objectives that could be turned off at any point, but they were generally so far away that it left a lot of room for players to carve their own path to get there. But when it came to side quests, there was almost no waypoints at all, leading the player to think critically on things like song lyrics, riddles, paintings, or rumors. But at the very least, Zelda provided players a quest log that would keep track of all their different main objectives and side quests, and it would highlight the key information for each. Elden Ring, on the other hand, very much in line with the philosophies of all their other games, gives you almost no help at all in completing any of its quests. You don't get a quest log, so you either have to write down the information yourself when you come across one of these NPCs, or you have to look up a guide online.
I think the quest design for the NPCs is one of the weaker points of Elden Ring. They needed to add something or some sort of tracking or something for, like, the world is just too big and too empty for, like, you to find this one monkey, like this guy, like he's just this one dude in a bush somewhere on the side. Like it's too archaic and too difficult to follow these quest lines.
And when it comes to the main quest, you don't get a waypoint showing you where it is. Instead, they just give you a line pointing you in the general direction. All of this is a little harsh, but it does reinforce the main purpose of the game, which is going out and exploring the world. The genius of Elden Ring's world design can't really be seen on the surface, both literally and figuratively. Even though Elden Ring passively funnels you through its world in a desired order, you still have the ability to tackle each one of these sections in whichever way you like. You just have to dig a little deeper. There are traps that will teleport you to the complete other side of the map. There's unassuming elevators that, if you go down them, will reveal entire new sections of your map that you can completely miss. And so many other secrets scattered throughout the world that just encourage you to explore all of its corners.
The reward structure for Elden Ring is one of the best, not only just for gaming, but for, like, not even just for open worlds, but for gaming in general. Like, the amount of unique rewards you get, and the fact that you can go to, like, some random gazebo and then get sent to, like, Shifra Underground Riverwell or whatever, to the Nokron cities and things like that. Like, that one moment makes the player think, oh man, I'm going to explore every single piece, every single inch of land in this game, because I do not want to ever miss anything that could possibly lead to something as cool as that.
The Lands Between is truly a masterclass in level design, and there's nothing else like it out there. These two games for a long time served as the only examples of modern open world design philosophies being put to use. Tears of the Kingdom did come out last year, which is technically a third example, but in this conversation, I think it's fair to group that together with Breath of the Wild, considering how similar the two games are to one another.
Yeah.
But now, 7 years after Breath of the Wild, we finally have a third example, and it's Dragon's Dogma 2.
I'm very, very curious to know what this take is going to be, because I want to play this game and I haven't, and I did not think it was going to be a third pillar of, like, open world game design.
As I said at the top, this game is really weird for a lot of reasons. It's honestly kind of shit sometimes, but this game really executes on the idea of making traveling through this world a great time. Very similar to the past two games we were talking about here, this game is designed in a way where the terrain will naturally guide your eyes to points of interest and has very little hand-holding or waypoints to get you there. There are things like statues on a hill, smoke from a campfire, a griffin flying in the sky, all here just to naturally veer you off the main path from your objective to keep you exploring the world in an organic way. But what's cool is they didn't stop there. They innovated in ways to make other parts of the game feel just as natural and organic. There was this time early on after I reached the first settlement where my objective was just to reach the next town. I had every intention of just heading straight there, but then as I'm walking towards the gate, my companion goes,
"Look, master, a treasure chest."
So of course I have to get the chest first, but then I decide it's time to leave. But as I walk towards the gate, this guy stops me saying,
"Going out, are you? You ought at least rest for the evening."
Then I go, you know what? That does sound like a good idea. So I go sleep in the inn for the night, and then I'm like, okay, now it's time to leave. I exit the inn, and as I'm walking out, then this guy goes,
we're running low on everything. Could I trouble you to run an errand for me?
okay, well, I should probably get a little extra money, right? So I spend the next 10 minutes gathering materials, and then I bought some armor, and I'm like, okay, now it's time to head to the next town. So I head for the gate, and then...
Hail, you a soldier?
So now this guy's telling me that there's a new recruit out there who's about to get killed by some monsters if we don't do anything. So I'm like, okay, well, I gotta save this guy. So I head out, kill the monsters, save the guy, bring him back to the town. So now after 45 minutes of distractions, I finally get out there and head to the next town. All of these different interactions I had with the NPCs weren't initiated by me. Rather, the NPCs would approach me, and it made all of these feel more like a happy accident rather than a deliberate choice I made by picking something off a list. They support this philosophy through another thing that it shares with Zelda, and it's systematic game design. Monster encounters can be completely unpredictable. You could just be fighting a
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is Dragon's Dogma 2, like, makes like navigating the world pretty treacherous. I think that's one of the cool things is that you can't, like, I think in Dragon's Dogma 1 there was like at night it would be like actually really hard to like actually be out there, and you would need a torch, otherwise you wouldn't be able to see. I think like there's like a certain amount of, I think one of the ways that it might be innovating is like making it so that you can't just go out there and like do whatever. Like, it is a world and it is dangerous, and you can't just like, it's not like a little playground for you to like run around in and like get materials and get like rewards for, but like a actual world that has a lot of like danger in it just by navigating through it.
group of enemies on the road, and all of a sudden a griffin just swoops down and now you're in a boss fight. Nighttime restricts your vision significantly, and it flips this philosophy of letting your eye be your guide on its head, and now you're just stumbling around in the dark, not being able to see what's 10 feet in front of you. Then probably the most unique and impactful systematic design element is the pawn system. This game lets you make a companion called a pawn, and this pawn will travel with you throughout the entire game. But there's this online component to them, where your pawn can be hired by other players in their game, and the collective experiences that your pawn will get from playing with other players will inform how it can guide you in your world, and vice versa for the pawns you decide to hire. I realize that the idea of your pawn guiding you to a specific objective is kind of contradictory to all these design principles I've been talking about here, but I think there's a key difference on why this is different than a traditional waypoint. This guidance that you're getting from your pawns is the result of your own decision making, giving you ownership over the experience rather than it just being handed to you. I had made the decision to hire this specific pawn, and if I had hired a different pawn, this guidance may not have been available to me. And you could also just tell the pawn you don't want to be guided. The idea of taking ownership over your experiences, I think, is really at the core of what these modern open world games are providing people. The evolution of these traditional blueprints have
I think a lot of it boils down to hand holding versus not hand holding. He alluded to that in the beginning of the video, and I think that's like the most important point for why a lot of these games are good and why a lot of them are bad. Like, there's a certain amount of hand holding that you need in a game that people will like, but there's also a certain amount of freedom. And when I say freedom, I don't even mean like you can walk from point A to point B. It's more like, can I create my own emergent situations based off the systems you've put in the game, right? When you can do that, you have agency, and when you have that agency, that means your hand's not being held. Like, to create that agency, you need systems that allow the player to have emergent behavior in their own video games. So that I think something Breath of the Wild, Elden Ring, and Dragon's Dogma 2 all have in common is the fact that there is no hand-holding in those worlds.
brought us to a place where developers are now just over-designing the exact type of experience they want every player to have in their world. But now with all these design decisions...
Yeah, like developers are like afraid of allowing players to create their own emergent experiences.
Removing a lot of these traditional hand-holding elements, it makes it so every accomplishment or discovery that you have feel like a personal experience, rather than it just being something on a list that the game laid out for you to do. Even though I've spent the past however long at this point singing the praises of these modern open world games, I think I'd be dishonest if I didn't also point out the pretty glaring downsides with them as well. And I think the most obvious one that all three of these games suffer from is narrative. I've said it before, when a player has the ability to
Yeah.
go wherever they want,
That is
whenever they
true.
want to, it's kind of hard to tell a story. It's not impossible, it just comes with some pretty big caveats. Like if the writer wants to include some sort of urgency. For example, oh no, the
I think this is one of the situations where Witcher 3 just stands head and heels above the rest. They created an open world, but also created one of the greatest narratives in gaming. One of the best like stories, interactions, things like that. Well, I guess actually, now that I think about it, like Witcher 3's actual like story with like the Wild Hunt was like, I guess kind of mid. Like it was just kind of average, like not that compelling. Whereas like, but like the story itself was like pretty good. I don't know. Maybe I'll let that one cook a little longer.
princess is in danger, we need to go save her. If this narrative setup was in a movie, our protagonist would solely be focusing on saving the princess. But in a game with these types of design principles that we've been talking about, instead we spend a lot of time doing things like sitting in a hot spring or playing hide and go seek with a forest spirit. But say you do just decide to go rush towards the main objective to keep the story going. There's still the issue that these story beats need to be designed in a way where they can be experienced in different orders. If there's nothing stopping me from seeing this story beat before I see this story beat, then the story needs to be set up in a way where this makes sense. This means that the narrative will very likely lack that rising tension that comes when you experience a story in a
Yeah, it all
specific
becomes
order of
very
events.
flat.
This is a glaring issue with these games using these modern design principles, and currently, no developer has really figured out how to solve it yet. Another issue I see is that I don't think these design principles can be applied to an urban environment. If you think of environments like Night City or Los Santos, you can't necessarily have your eye be naturally guided to points of interest because you're surrounded by buildings. So in this context, it
Yeah,
may make a
that's
lot
a
more
good point
sense
as
to
well.
use traditional waypoints or, some sort of hand-holding to get there, but that's a different type of game. Okay, it's time to wrap this out. I love Rockstar games. I love most of Bethesda's games. Ubisoft games are very hit or miss for me, but I like some of them. There's a lot of other open world games too that I like that we haven't even been able to talk about here, but it's just way too much to try to wrap into one conversation, and a lot of these are outliers rather than blueprints. But I've truly become burnt out on these traditional blueprints we've been talking about here. But these modern open world games are finally getting me excited again, and they do this by creating a spirit of curiosity, adventure, and discovery. The curiosity comes from actually seeing something with your own eyes out in the distance that gets you excited, and you want to go chase that thing down. And then you go on your own personal adventure to get there, carving your own path. And along the way, you're probably going to discover a lot of things you weren't intending to find. And then once you get to that thing you originally set your eyes on, you'll probably find something else out in the distance that gets you excited all over again. And the loop continues. It's truly a unique experience that separates these games from every other open world game ever made. And it's why Zelda and Elden Ring, not Dragon's Dogma, are hailed as some of the greatest video games ever made. I really hope we see other games adopt these philosophies, but who knows? We might never see another game do it again. I mean, this might be it. I hope I'm wrong, but
I mean, I think now that Elden Ring has really like blown open the doors with like it's like game and like it sold like 25 million and like all that stuff. I'm very curious to know which developers are going to jump on that and try to make their own Elden Ring. I think like 80% of them will be complete dog shit, but I think hopefully 20% will be okay, and that's okay with me.
I know not everyone will agree with the opinions I have around these games, but I'd still love to hear from everybody in the comments and have some conversation around it, because I know it all just comes from a place of us just loving video games. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I really, really appreciate it. This video took me a long time to make, and I enjoyed doing it, and I hope some other people enjoyed watching it. I have some other topics that I'm cooking up, and I'd love to get them out soon. If you're at all interested in just talking about video games, please hit that subscribe button. Or if you never want to hear my voice again and you still made it this far, a like would be greatly appreciated. Seriously, thank you so much for watching. It really means a lot to me, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. See ya.
Yo, this guy's videos. I've never actually I've never watched any of his videos before. This is a really good video. I actually really liked it a lot. I think he like brought up a lot of really good points. I kind of liked like the whole timeline of like what were the open world juggernauts and like what are like the new like kind of innovators, things like that. It's a really, really good video. Definitely gonna be subbing to this guy. it's actually insane that he only has like this video should have like 2-3 million views, I think, and his channel should have like hundreds of thousands of viewers. Like this is or subs. Like this is just like, yeah, I mean, it's definitely heavily Nikki Jakey inspired, but like whatever. Like it's good content's good content, right? Overall, yeah, I mean, I think Breath of the Wild and Elden Ring are definitely the two pillars of like modern day open world design. I do want to give a nod to Witcher 3 because I do think that it innovates on a certain aspect, which is basically like the narrative in an open world game, because it is a truly open world game, and a lot of it is like, you know, the same tired old tropes that we've seen before, where, you know, you have like your markers, like your whatever, all this stuff, but like the way the narrative unfolds in that game with like the side interactions, the side quests are like basically part of the main game. I think like the way that narrative is interwoven with the open world game design is one of the only games I can think of that has executed it that well. I do think Witcher 3 is in that conversation. But yeah, overall, amazing video. Shout out to what's his name? Nick Davidson. Shout out Nick Davidson. For me on my end, guys, if you liked my content, if you liked the, I guess, like insight I gave, if I gave any, hit me with a like and a sub. If not, then, you know, give me some feedback. I'd love to improve and sort of grow like this channel and like my thoughts on things. So yeah, from my end, I'm gonna be out. Peace.